Greetings, everyone. You'll hear a video very shortly as we get on here with our panel discussion on Afrofuturism and African American science fiction. And the video should be playing shortly. Thank you very much for your patience. Thank you for joining us today. I'm excited to present this panel on behalf of the Curatorial Council and Carnegie Hall for the Afrofuturism Festival. I think we have an exciting lineup of scholars and literary people that are very knowledgeable about the topic of African American science fiction and Afrofuturism. People have been waiting on this panel and been asking me questions for a while. When was it going to happen? Well, today it's happening. So next, I'd like to introduce you to our moderator, Mr. Jarvis Sheffield. And Jarvis is going to introduce our panelists and take us on our way. Thank you for joining us, Jarvis.
Hello, and thank you for having me. I am extremely blessed and highly favored to be here today. All right, everyone. Today we're going to discuss Black speculative fiction, imagination, and the latest literary perspectives in Afrofuturism and Black science fiction. I'm extremely honored here to be here today on this panel and thankful for Dr. Ronaldo Anderson of the Black Speculative Arts um, movement for creating this great event at Carnegie Hall. I want to invite you all to participate in the events after hours and to also go back and watch all the previous videos that have been going on throughout this month at this Carnegie event. For those that don't know me, my name is Jarvis Sheffield. I am the creator of Black Science Fiction Society, the 2020 Solstice Award recipient, chair of the 10 Share Marketing Committee, director of the Diversity Track with Dragon Con, and media coordinator at Historic Tennessee State University. Now, with that said, I am extremely pleased to be here today with like-minded, talented, and esteemed guests, Stephen Barnes, P.G. LeClark, Isaiah Lavender III, and Tim Fielder. Thank you so much for being part of this panel.
Very welcome.
Great to see you all. So with that said, gentlemen, please provide us with a brief introduction of yourselves in your own words.
Well, who would you like to start?
Man, Steve, you can go first, man.
Okay. Well, my name is Stephen
All right.
Barnes, and I've been in the field since before 1980. I've published about 3 million words of fiction, about 30-something novels, plus written for television, Outer Limits, Twilight Zone, stuff like that. So I was the kind of the first of the second generation of Afrofuturists. Chip Delaney and Octavia Butler were there first. Chip was the father of the field in I think most important ways. And it's just wonderful seeing how much the field has blossomed in the last 20 years. It was kind of lonely out there for a while, but things are really nice right now.
Good. Let's go to Tim.
Yeah, Tim Fielder, graphic novelist, visual Afrofuturist, known primarily for Infinitum, an Afrofuturist tale published by HarperCollins, and just released reissue of Maddie's Rocket Book 1 from my company, Diesel Funk Studios. I've been in the game for a long time. Very, very obscure until very recently. Thank God, things do come to an end. And now glad where I am and happy to be a part of the Carnegie Hall Afrofuturism Festival. Known for Black Metropolis, which is my show up for the final week at 62 Hamilton Terrace Children's Arts Carnival. And I'm here to provide comedic relief for this event.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for alerting me of that. All right. Is Julie here? All right. Well, we're going to move on to Isaiah. Oh, there's Julie.
Okay.
Oh, hi. You guys can hear me?
Yeah.
What's up, man?
So I guess I'm supposed to go next. I'm P. Jelly Clark. I'm a newbie in this game. I'm probably known for a short story I wrote called The Secret Lives of the Nine Negro Teeth of George Washington, as well as a few novellas such as Ring Shout and the Black God's Drums. My most recent novel is called A Master of Jinn. And I'm happy to be here. Thank you, Ronaldo, for inviting me to take part in this, so we can talk about this history that is often, I think, underreported. And so I'm hoping that I'm able to learn some things today, and we're hopefully able to give those who are listening some interesting information.
Fantastic. Let's move on to Isaiah.
Hi, everyone. I'm Isaiah Lavender III. I suppose I'm one of the scholars of the group, though I wouldn't say I'm necessarily an Afrofuturist, but that's what people claim, and that's the flag I'm waving today. And I am honored and humbled to be here with this group of gentlemen. Oh, and I'm a professor at the University of Georgia, Sterling Goodman Professor of English. I've published couple of monographs and edited 3 collections.
Okay. Oh, very impressive.
Oh, and I guess I better throw my scholarly bona fides out there. I'm currently the Director of Graduate Studies at the Department of Africology and African American Studies at Temple University, the #1 Africana Studies program in the country.
All right. Impressive, very impressive. All right, so we're going to jump right in here. The term Afrofuturism came about in 1987 with what's his name? It was coined by the culture critic Mark Deary in his 1994 essay called "Black to the Future." Obviously, uh, Afrofuturism has been around before it was given a name. What do you think the roots of Afrofuturism come from in your perspective? And whoever wants to jump in first, let's just jump in and let us know what you think.
Well, I was told to respect my elders, so I'll leave that to Stephen Barnes.
There you go.
I knew it was coming. I knew it was coming.
Back in my day. Okay, so to answer that question, you have to ask the question, from my perspective, you have to ask the question of what science fiction is.
Right.
Okay, so if we start with the notion that fantasy is basically all fiction is fantasy, because it didn't happen that way. Most reporting too. But the thing that we call fantasy explicitly, is sort of a self-contained universe in which things like magic and so forth exist. And it is science fiction in some ways would be a specialized subset of fantasy that is both internally and externally consistent, where we not only have a world in which things are happening that are not like our world, but it's usually grounded in physics. That is what classic science fiction is. Afrofuturism, from that perspective, would simply be the science fiction, fantasy, and horror, in terms of literary and cinema, produced by the children of the African diaspora or concerning them intimately. It has branched out from there to clothing and music and art and dance and any number of other things. That's like, wow, I'm just looking at this. So it's become kind of an umbrella term for the mythologies, especially created by the children of the diaspora who had their culture stripped away from them as part of the brainwashing process that was necessary to support slavery. So it is reintegrating ourselves into the world pattern. We are here, we've always been here, and we're going to be here. So it's kind of that. And I hope that's not too broad to be useful.
No, I kind of like that one. I know, and I would say it's kind of distinct from what maybe the Europeans. I would just add to that is different from the European sci-fi in terms of, if you're an enslaved African, freedom was like science fiction. In terms of, I think their intent was probably more tied to some aspects or reaction to the European Enlightenment to a certain extent, and I kind of see, and that's why I always call what we do a lot of times Black speculative production is kind of parallel to that, and sometimes it might overlap. But I think, that's why I always like when I look at Martin Delaney's work in terms of how it emerged in the context that it emerged and why it emerged in relation to other kind of phenomenon at the time. But yeah, Stephen, I think you in a very kind of literary, eloquent way, pretty much filled in a lot, painted a nice picture for how it operates as an umbrella term for, and that's why in the video I did for Carnegie Hall now, I think it's elevated. I look at it as aspects of high art now, in terms of high culture, in terms of what it can do, in terms of being in galleries and exhibitions.
Right. Well, I would like to jump in here and go with Mark Deary, who in the South Atlantic Quarterly in 1993 does this set of essays with Greg Tate, Trisha Rose, and Samuel R. Delaney. And I think Deary properly gets credit for coming up with the term for the essay that caps that set of interviews. But Delaney, Tate, and Rose do the heavy lifting. And there's a term in that I really like that Tate comes up with, that he says Black people live a science fictional existence. And he means by that, I think, when enslaved persons are taken, they are forced to speak alien languages, forced to take an alien craft that they've never seen to an alien land, in which they've also never seen, and forced to eat alien foods, speak alien languages, and that is Black existence in the New World. And so from that perspective, almost anything could be Afrofuturism if we think of it writ large in that way. And I'll stop there.
Oh, that was pretty intense. I've never quite heard it put that in that perspective before, but very interesting. Jelly?
Those are great definitions. I don't know that I have too much to add. I think one of the things that was great to hear Stephen say was using it as an umbrella term that talks about fantasy and everything else, because Afrofuturism is often the futurist part, often becomes the part that catches people in the term, right? So what exactly goes under the umbrella? Are we simply talking about aspects of futurism? And then therefore, how do we fit fantasy? It's looking at some kind of romantic notions of the past. And so I remember us having these debates. Was Charles Saunders Afrofuturism, right, for his creation, or does that have another term? But I think it's different. If we are using it as an umbrella term, like people use speculative fiction, for instance, I think then yes, it can fit under that. But I think that, of course, as you guys know, all you have to do is pop in some online forum and the definitions of Afrofuturism run amok. And there aren't strict definitions of them. So it's interesting that hearing all of these definitions here, I think I like Stephen's the most, though I certainly have heard the others that are much more restrictive, actually, on what they consider it. Often it having to do with simply pure science fiction elements that deal with a futurist landscape. But, we can talk about that more as we go on.
All right, we'll not take that. All right, Tim.
Well, I think the definition and where Afrofuturism is has been pretty much explained by everyone here. I would just add that more from the pop culture perspective, Negroes and spaceships. That's what it is for me. Negroes and spaceships. I want to be able to do things with people that look like me, look like you, Jarvis, look like you, Stephen. And I want us to be in speculative environments where we can do all the things that Tom Swift did and Jules Verne did, and we can live and not die at the end just before the credits roll. That's what I'm interested in doing in many, many different forums and mediums. And it is nice to see it ascend now, this form, to where like this conversation here is an Afrofuturist moment. And I'm just grateful to be here. Still be here, thank God.
All right, and we're glad to have you as well. All right, so given all of that, Afrofuturism has elements of the past, the present, and the future. Could, in your view, could you give us your opinion of what aspects are we living Afrofuturism now?
Afrofuturism right now would be how are Black people interacting with technology or the future, or how things changed. To a certain degree, it's a little bit difficult for Black Americans because we don't have a separate culture in the way anthropologists talk about culture. We don't have a separate language. We don't have a separate, distinct religion, in that sense, because we were too diffuse in that way. So writing about Black people in the future isn't necessarily that different from writing about a white person in that exact same position. However, I think that when you realize that anything talking about the future is really talking about the present, then I think a lot of young artists especially want to bring a Black flavor to that. Let me bring the culture that I wanted to see into the future. So it's a Black colony in space, and it's Black people doing that, because we never had that. Okay. So what was done to us was on kind of an unconscious level, because I don't think white people are clever enough to have done it deliberately. Nobody is. Is the inability for us to go back and put in the building blocks that were taken away. So it's like, okay, well, everything is equal now, so let's just go forward and talk about, so it's diversity in space and this and this. But you need that opportunity to see Black people bouncing off other Black people, developing their own rhythm of thought and speech and so forth, in the same way that in many ways science fiction is the religion of the 20th century, in the sense that religions talk about where did we come from, how is the universe created? Is there a God? And what does God think about us? To that degree, Black people are, in America, are arguably the only people on the planet who worship a God that looks more like our oppressors than us. It's, you know, and I consider myself a Christian, so it's like I understand the irony of that, but it creates cracks in the structure that we have to have in order to lift something heavy. You can't lift a heavy weight on roller skates. You know, you have to have your feet solidly on the ground. So it's totally natural for people want to create these futures that look blacker than the future actually will, because, you know, the racial groups are becoming more diffuse and interrelated. But you're talking about emotional truth, cultural truth, mythological truth, not historical truth. And to that degree, then these are important images.
Yeah, I think just adding on top of that, I feel like, you know, I've said this before in other interviews, and I think it bears repeating here in this particular forum, is that, well, since I'm a sequential storyteller, right, and I work in panels and stuff, and we tell stories in order and chronologically, I always go to that scene in Jurassic Park, how they recreated the dinosaurs. So much of our past has been eliminated, burned away, disappeared, that what you're doing is you're using science and using history, and you're basically projecting through speculative nature, you're filling in all the missing parts. And you're creating essentially a new history, a new present, and a new future at the same time. And I find that that has entertainment value, but also it has a value that I think, yeah, I would agree that Black Americans don't have culture, a base foundational culture, the same way other cultures do on the planet, because they have a national kind of geographic source. However, I think we are the new world culture. That's what I think. I think we are world culture. Black American culture permeates through all levels of society. That's what I believe.
Right. Like I like thinking about the future in some ways, but I also like how authors go to the past. And since Stephen is here, I would say, and quick plug, I love Lion's Blood, and I love how he imagines the way the world could have been if Europe had never recovered from the bubonic plague, and blacks get into the New World first and create a new kind of slavery here in the New World, to right down to the point where you don't have the Statue of Liberty, but you have a giant black man in the Gulf of Mexico outside of New Orleans. I've always loved that image and what he's done in playing with the past, showing how humanity's could be a nasty species when you think of us all coming from, you know, the Olduvai Gorge. And I've always loved that. I've loved P. Djeli Clark's novel Ring Shout, when you have the giant devil character, you know, oh, I'm not getting it right. But the butcher with all those millions of mouths in his body coming out at Stone Mountain, and the rise of these black women warriors to combat him, and an actual ring shout from the Gullah Geechee culture. I think he's doing amazing things with that. I love what Justina Ireland does in her zombie fiction alternate history called, what's it called? Dread Nation, where zombies arise on the second day of the Battle of Gettysburg, and new laws come into existence after they're put down, where blacks and Native Americans are forced to become warriors on behalf of white people, and everything goes forward from that imaginary amendment that comes about in the Constitution. And so looking carefully at history and changing it and knowing how to do that is an Afrofuturist thing too, imagining what could be different if black people were in a different situation is always a wonderful thing. That's kind of why I do what I do in terms of reading science fiction, fantasy, alternate history, and horror as well. And you can see the same thing going on with films. but I'll leave that for later, I suppose.
I know. I'm thinking about what Stephen was saying, and our culture, because we're still basically a young culture, in relation to other cultures. So we have one, but I think other people kind of try to dispossess us of it, and that's the issue. But I know ministers now that are reading P. Jelly's work, The Black God's Drums, in terms of we really have created, because Black people are not Protestants. Like, for example, Protestants were protesting the Catholic Church. We don't protest Catholic Church. We protest white people. And so we have unconsciously developed a different branch of Christianity, one that is focused on anti-racism rather than protesting the Catholic Church or the Eastern Orthodox or whatever. But I think until enough Black preachers quit trying to be accepted by the white people who teach in seminaries and go on and develop their own theology, it might reinvigorate Christianity in the Black community here. And when I was talking to some of my friends in Africa, I even see military science applications to Afrofuturism. For example, I was talking to a young cat over in South Africa about they ought to develop like some type of virus called Just Grew to go and attack fascist and white supremacists software around the world, because that's what other cultures do. They'll name their weapons or whatever after something in their culture. Like I believe China named a rocket after something out of the Chinese Revolution. So to me, Afrofuturism is still becoming, and I don't necessarily, and I guess this is where I'm like, and it's going to have both good and dark to it, that attracts me. Like, hey, I kind of like Darth Vader in certain aspects of it. Of what Darth Vader was about. And so I don't think, and that's why I tell people I embrace all of it, whether it's the light or the dark, in terms of what it can become. The military science applications that I think are underdeveloped or theorized at this point. The things related to what are we going to even eat as a diet in the future, in terms of maybe so many of us wouldn't be getting sick or whatever if we had the diet of our ancestors instead of this processed crap that people have given us. And I think a lot about, I remember what Stephen said once at the Astro Blackness Summit that I've never forgotten. I think in terms of why he embraced aspects of martial arts, in terms of that martial arts gives you a kind of locus of control. And I've looked at the African influence on martial arts in terms of the New World, and I was like, okay. And so that was an aspect, I think, where the Afro-Brazilian people that are practicing Afrofuturism have told me the story about in Capoeira, that in terms of it was almost illegal for them to do this African martial art. And so they had to kind of do it in the form of a dance, in terms of that was their way of hiding in plain sight to a certain extent. And so, yeah, that's why I'm thinking we're still, Afrofuturism is not where it's supposed to be yet, but it's on its way there. And I think in light of current events, especially since last year with January 6th, oh yeah, I'm really digging P. Jelly's approach to how to deal with some things. I mean, it should be taught in Sunday school. And so, I'd like to, P. Jelly, you don't know how a lot, besides being a good alpha man, I think that very quietly, a lot of people have been loving your work in terms of this kind of alternative history point of it. And that's why I kind of saw you as like the way I looked at Stephen Barnes' work, Lion's Blood, how I'm like, man, why was this not introduced to us in English lit class at Jackson State back in the 90s or 80s when that came out? And so I kind of see you and Stephen Barnes when in those kind of works, this alternative history thing really being a part of that tradition of a Martin Delaney and a Sutton Griggs.
Chip Delaney. Samuel R. Chip Delaney. Just want to make sure we get that right, because Chip is still alive. He's still with us and still a great man.
Yeah. All right. Now we're going to lead right on into Pete Jelly. Let's get it from the source.
So thank you for that, Ronaldo. I got to say that I remember when I first read Lion's Blood too, right? So I'd always loved alternate history, counterfactuals, but they were always the same thing. What if the Nazis had won? right? What if the Confederates had won? It was like I'd seen that 1,000 times. And when I remember hearing about Stephen Barnes' book, I remember seeing the cover with the white Irish slave holding the horse, and it was like my whole wig got peeled back. I was like, "What? I've never seen anything like it. I'd never conceived of counterfactuals in that way, and it just opened up this whole new world for these things." So I say all this to say that when I think of something like the Black God's Drums, if I were to go back and say what were my, what pulled me there, it was something like reading Stephen's books, right? Reading Lion's Blood. It got me thinking about how do Black people imagine, right? There it is. How do we imagine these differences and how important that is for us, right? How many times we've dreamt about going back to the slave ship and saying, okay, everybody, this is your M16. This is what we're going to do right now.
Yes.
Right. And there's a way that speculative fiction, in some ways, what we do here can be kind of cathartic, right? We're like, I think what you're talking about, we're like going back and trying to, in some ways, we're projecting the future and as well trying to go back and do those things we can't undo in the past, right? Trying to imagine them differently, place ourselves in these ways of power. I think about, people don't think of this often as Afrofuturism or speculative fiction, but Kehinde Wiley's art, right? The way he takes Black people from right around the way on the street corner, puts them on the horse instead of Napoleon, right? Has them. I've often actually compared that to Lion's Blood and these kinds of things by, imagining Black people in these positions of power that we don't often see ourselves. And so, Ronaldo, it's funny when you brought up like your love of things like Darth Vader and all these. And I was like, when I was younger, I noticed that I was often rooting for the quote unquote bad guy in the film. And it took when I got older, I was like, oh, I liked them because I thought they were going to overthrow white people. That's why I was rooting for Cobra instead of G.I. Joe.
Along that line, I remember being on panel.
Great. That's why I was liking the Aliens. It took me a while to realize what was going on. But I think it says, when we think about the things that we grew up with, Lovecraftian themes and all of these other things, and we think about how maybe internally how we would take those things in, but then try to have this oppositional, this counter narrative to what we were seeing, in making Vader the hero and making the monsters at times the hero. And I think about, I've heard the stories about Black people's reactions to Planet of the Apes and, seeing the apes for the first time, actually rooting for them instead of Charlton Heston. I think about how we take this stuff in and we interpret it for ourselves. And I think it speaks to how we create culture, right? That the culture we create, we people of the diaspora, in a sense, it's not a culture it's a culture that has African elements, but it's not exactly of Africa. It's a culture that is birthed in parts in the West, but it's not exactly of the West, right? It's something else. And I think of people like Dessalines giving that speech, right, for independence, where he says, I have avenged America, in a sense, understanding that he is of the West, but not part of the West, right? That this new nation he's forming, Haiti, is something different in the West, something that the West is going to have to deal with, right?
Yeah.
And yet it has these roots in Africa, yet it's something else. And I think in many ways, that's the culture we create, right? Whether it's jazz, whether it's hip hop, whether it's our speculative fiction, it's this thing that is birthed in the in-between. And it doesn't exactly have a distinct home, except in the home that we give it, right? That we've created it here. So
that's brilliant.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What you just said right there, I had never considered that we were placed in a position where you have to evolve the anthropologist's definition of culture.
Yes.
In order to understand what has happened here. There are ways in which it might be said that the children of the diaspora created the first post-industrialist culture, based upon communication forms that took a lot of diverse people that were separated by time and space, and yet they had the same yearning to create culture that every other group does. So to measure what it was that they did by the standards of geopolitical, these people are all concentrated together. They were able to create this language. So the future is going to be more the kinds of cultures you're talking about. That's what we're going to get. there's something really brilliant in what you were saying there. I hope that you will continue to explore that thought because it's worthy.
Very true. Now, in our talks, I've heard the jazz being brought up, and so I have to ask, where do you see Afrofuturism going? Is it, in your estimation, is it going to be a fad, or is it going to have longevity, or will it be co-opted?
All of the above.
Yeah.
I mean,
Go ahead.
all good things get watered down in time. However, there will be, as long as you believe in equality, as long as you believe that we actually have the goods between our ears and in our hearts, then there are going to be people who buy it, use it, duplicate it, counterfeit it, but there will still be original artists who connect with that source and create, and that will just be part of the mix, man, and a beautiful part of that mix. That's, I just wanted to be there with the rest of the gang, just there with the rest of humanity. And for too long we've been brainwashed to believe that we were not capable of having that and not deserving of having that. And I think that is a major, I can't claim to be free of that. I was born before segregation ended, so there are younger people coming along in a generation that is on the other side of the voting rights amendment, who have a different view of who it is that they are. And God bless them. God bless you, everyone. I'm carrying different wounds, and I expect that would have a result in my perspective. And that those of you, if anything I did made any difference, then hopefully it changed things enough that you will grow up in a world where you don't have to carry the load that I'm carrying. You won't need 40 years of martial arts training just to feel safe in the world. Just being honest,
Man, and I'll never forget when Steven said that. I heard him say that in California, because one of my other friends who told me, who was born in 1950, who I guess was impacted by that weight, he said, "Ronaldo, my birth certificate says colored. You were born black."
Yeah.
And I told him, and that's why I guess I kind of wear the black hat going to the future. Like, for instance, I'm tired of seeing black people cry on TV after they got to say some bullshit. "Oh, I'm so proud to be an American." Like, I want somebody, see my short nerds, I want somebody during a Senate confirmation to say "fuck you" to some Southern cracker, rather than having to sit there and listen to some intellectually inferior person who's got to perform for a bunch of ignorant Southern knuckleheads to get votes. That's the part that pisses me off. That's why I'm like, and then what is it? I mean, that's why that's why I'm sick of being black people. "Oh, I'm crying, crying for stuff." I want somebody to wear the black hat and say, "Yeah, I'm glad I did it." Like Samuel L. Jackson in the movie. "I did that shit, and I'm glad I did it, and he deserved it.
And I hope he burns in hell."
I hope he burns in hell. And so, and that's why, when all this propaganda that we get now about why what's going on I call it the European war. It's not worldwide. I know a whole bunch of people in Africa, China. It's like I told you, it's like the return of the color curtain, where everybody who doesn't live in Europe is supposed to have empathy. And I do have empathy for what's going on there for the innocent over there. But the fact that a whole bunch of suffering that's in the world now and has been going on for a while by the millions is somehow treated as less than is. So I just look at it, the irony of people who want me to stand up for something that's going on in Europe, but won't stand up for my right to vote here. I just see the irony in that, and like it's like a joke, in terms of what's happening. And so hopefully it comes to an end. But in a way, I know when my own children ask me about it, I'm glad they're seeing that, because what I remember my grandfather used to say, when I thought, back during nicer times when people used to not say things in public the way they do now, he said one thing. He said, "Let me tell you something about the white man, son. Don't worry, they won't let you down. If you just wait on him, he's going to show you who he is." And so all these deaths, the knees on necks, and the insensitivity towards our children dying in the streets. I don't have any tears left for people that are not family. Now, I mean, that's why I'm just saying I'm all out of tears right now, and and to a certain extent out of patience, which is why I guess I'd say I'm kind of like a black hat Afrofuturist in terms of what I think's coming, the way the world is kind of this new term they call deglobalization at the moment, and so so there are parts of that's happening in the dark that makes my heart glad, in terms of what's happening, and that's probably why my ascension into heaven is suspect, but I will go there with eyes wide open. I will not try to bullshit my way. Hey man, I did that shit, so whatever happens, happens.
As to the question, however, about Afrofuturism and whether or not it has legs, I think I'll just deal with it from a just purely practical point of view. It's like, and it was, we were saying this in the pre-talk a few days ago. It's like jazz required instruments. You have to learn how to play instruments. It's a very complex process, requires money to be able to have access to those materials. Same thing with sports. Certain, football, you have to have gear. It has to have this monetary base. Hip hop, dramatically less so, right? Because you didn't need as much gear to do it. I think Afrofuturism has the possibility of very profound legs because technology has permeated all sectors of society. Everyone has a 4K phone, higher than films that were shot in the early 2000s. That everyone has a cell phone. You can write, you can record, and you can record video, and you can also you can do many things. You can communicate with other people. So I think having access to this technology allows us and allows Afrofuturism to, in effect, spread much more readily and be created in a way that is much more practical and pragmatic than in the past other forms. And I think Afrofuturism, look at what's happening at social media. One of the things, we have this Carnegie Hall Afrofuturism Festival. One thing that's profound about it is that it's all over the world. I know they call it a citywide festival, but it's actually function as an international festival. That happens due to the internet. It happens due to communication, the ability to be able to shoot film, video. This is being recorded so people can watch it 50 years from now. I think that's why it has legs.
Yeah, like I would say, if we come back to the original question, I was in an elevator in 2002, and I heard a woman say she believed that Afrofuturism is going to be as big as the Harlem Renaissance. And I was doubting what she said at that point in time. But she's right. It's become huge. You could look at a film like Get Out or Black Panther and see Afrofuturistic roots in those things, which those two films really bring it to the mainstream, 2016, 2017, and it goes off in a big way. Allows for something like the film Master that just came out on Amazon Prime to become an Afrofuturist work in terms of the horror that goes on in it and the supernatural that goes on in it, with this young Black female freshman at Ivy League University with a brand new tenured Black housemaster English professor, which I find always kind of fascinating, in that you have music, you have artwork, you have film, you have literature, you have scholarship, all of these things coming together. You have graphic narrative, comic books, all of this coming together to create this massive idea of what Black cultures, plural, could be. And then you have dissidents with the idea of Afrofuturism, such as Nnedi Okorafor, and I agree with her that African futurism, one word, is its own thing, and that it should be its own thing. And that's what creates, I don't know, what I call a colored wave of science fiction, but that goes beyond what we're doing here. And I don't know. It's just an amazing thing to be living right now and reading peoples of color producing their own visions of what a future looks like, with themselves in it, writing themselves into a future that's been denied by white projections of what science fiction and fantasy is. And so I really think it's an amazing time to be a young person or an old person reading creative production by Black people and others.
All right.
Oh, one exciting thing that is happening, I want to add on to what Isaiah said. I just reviewed something. There are the term they're using, whether they call it techno-orientalism or something else, they're looking at how that works with Afrofuturism now, or second wave Afrofuturism. Because in a recent talk, I was saying, based upon just simply population demographics, like the term Afro manga, 80% of the world is going to be Black and Asian in the next few decades. And so you'll probably see some interesting fusions around there. And it's in that kind of Afro manga, Afro Asiatic kind of thing is showing up in politics, like what happened in the Solomon Islands down in the Pacific. You know, people that are basically Black people who just did a treaty with China for security reasons, and it has the Australians crapping their pants right now in terms of having the agency as this small Black island nation teaming up with China and pissing off the Australians. I love it, you know, and so it's going forward into the future now, because there are so many things is getting off into now, like philosophy, technology, and so forth. That's why I wouldn't necessarily think of Nnedi Okorafor's African futurism, one word, as part of that. I look at African futurism as two words, which existed before Nnedi created the one word, with Pamela Sundstrom and other people in Africa that were doing African futurism. I just look at what Nnedi's doing as kind of like a localized African literary phenomenon that stands on its own, but it's not as expansive as what Pamela Fatima Sundstrom talked about a decade ago, and was not given proper credit for when she came out with the concept. And actually, there's, I guess, the backstory is there was an attempt to really prevent that story from getting out in a different format that was blocked by a scholar in England that prevented her work from getting republished. So so that's why when I say African futurism, I think of Pamela Sundstrom has the honor of place several years before anybody else was even thinking of the term African futurity.
Okay. I want to get Jelly's perspective.
I think everyone has covered this well. The only thing I guess I would add is, in some ways, it's when we think about, you know, will it last? Will it go into the future? I mean, this may sound like I'm being trite, but in some ways, it's always been here, right? What we are seeing now is that it's moving into different mediums. I think, as Isaiah said, it's getting like, you know, for I think what we're seeing now is a large number of people able to be published, a large number of people able to put their work out into the larger, you know, Hollywood sphere, or people able to use social media. I mean, look at Black Twitter is futuristic, right? It's very futuristic. It's its own beast, right? And the way that Black people use social media, TikTok. There's some TikToks, by the way, that are pure hilarity and science fiction mixed into one. There's a guy who pretends he's the different planets, and the planets are having conversations. You've ever seen these, right? And they're like, all the planets are different variations of Black people having conversations with each other. Pluto can rap really well. By the way, Uranus has, pardon me, not Uranus, but Saturn has 5 rings. It's supposed to be like LeBron, right? And so, you know, there's these interesting ways where he's taken science and he's using actual astronomy, right, to talk about these things. But the way that he's doing it is so relatable to aspects of Black culture, which, by the way, thanks to things like social media. When I don't even want to go into the African futurism, Afrofuturism debates and controversies, but there's a way that beyond all of that, all these different all these different diaspora and African futures and African cultures are being melded together thanks to YouTube and social media, right? And so you have elements of Black dance now where you can't tell if it came from the Congo, Nigeria, or Detroit, right? It's just all melding together. And so that's something else that we're going to actually see. As much as we have these diaspora wars, it's also amazing how much we're mixing and melding culture now without even thinking about it, right? And this is coming about in great ways, social media. But going back to what I was saying about it always being here, long before I was able to be introduced to a Stephen Barnes or to Chip Delaney or to an Octavia Butler, I was thinking it, right? I was the seeds of what, I didn't have a name for it, right? I didn't have a word for it, but my friends and I were interested in it. You know, we were interested in science fiction and trying to figure out how Black people fit into things that we're not allowed to be in. I always tell this story. When Star Wars came out, I was really small at the time. I wanted to go see it. And my mother said, no. I said, why can't I go see it? My mother said, because there are no Black people in it. And she said, are they trying to say there's no Black people in the future? And so I came and I told her, well, no, you see in the credits, it says it's a long, what is it?
Long time ago.
Long time ago, far away.
Said, well, there was no white people before Black people, so it's definitely wrong. And so I was not able to go see Star Wars until The Empire Strikes Back came out. And, Billy D. Williams was in it, right? Yeah. And so I think about these kinds of things. My mother, who, she didn't know terms like Afrofuturism and so forth, but she understood there should be Black people in here. And what are you trying to say about the future and Black people's place within it, right? And so I think there are ways that we've always been thinking about these things. We've always had them in the back of our minds. Some of them have been fortunate to we've always been writing about it since someone like, let me get my earlier Samuel Delaney since earlier writers thinking about slave revolts and these other things, we go back to thinking about people like Du Bois and others. We've always been thinking about it in some shape, form, or fashion. And so all we're seeing now is, yes, it's like the tip of the iceberg. We're getting to see it all out here in the public, and that's a great thing. It's a fantastic thing. But I think it's going to keep on existing no matter what.
Fantastic. I love you guys' perspectives. It's amazing hearing from you all. Now, I would like for you all to share a bit of work that you've done that's Afrofuturistic with the world. Tell us something. Tell us about one of your projects.
Well, don't jump all in, guys.
Oh, Stephen.
Me? What? Okay. The latest one is this. I've been trying to get it published for 10 years. I had several other books done in that period of time, but this is very close to my heart because it's an anthology of Afrofuturistic. I just consider them to be Steve Barnes stories, but if you all want to call, that certainly Afrofuturism is a description, as well as some others would be. Each of which represents one of the 8 stories, each of which represents one of Buddhism's 8 steps to enlightenment, the Eightfold Path, the first thing that the Buddha taught when he came from under the Bodhi tree, the Four Noble Truths in the Eightfold Path, right speech, right action, right thought, and so forth and so on, and done as if they're sort of EC style, short stories, horror, science fiction, war stories, and stuff like that, and done with the wonderful, wonderful writer and dear friend Charles Johnson, who's a Buddhist scholar and National Book Award winning author, just brilliant man. And I'm very proud of it. It's the kind of thing that I've wanted to do for a very long time. And John Jennings at Megascope Books made it possible because of his line of comics and graphic novels. So this is another sign that the culture has shifted, that there are resources to create things like this. It's like my appreciation of Black Panther was not just that I like the movie, but what it symbolized in terms of the culture being willing to put, $150 million or whatever it cost, to do this. That is the fact that the opportunity is there is as important as what is done with the opportunity, from my position.
All right.
All right. I guess I got a couple of projects going now. One, the title, because you mentioned jazz earlier. I put a CFP out with the Black Scholar, where which is it continues the trajectory that I started when I put the when Charles Jones and I put out the 2.0 anthology, where I was arguing for the primacy of place with Africana studies rather than cultural studies sphere or whatever. And the title that we picked was the Shape of Things to Come, which I drew upon from a Ornette Coleman album and a science fiction novel by H.G. Wells. So that kind of overlap between science fiction and jazz for that title. That will be out in the next by next spring, and I'm excited about these scholars, that the work that's coming in that is situating Afrofuturism philosophically and theoretically within the African American studies tradition. Also, the project that I started when we got the Black Speculative Arts movement going, that has now been realized. We're on 4 continents. Actually, I think the Afro-Brazilians probably within a year are going to have more people in the movement than there are in North America, the way it's growing. I found out they have 4 different geographic ways they talk about Afrofuturism just in Brazil. They have this one perspective that deals with Afrofuturism and Amazonian futurism. They have another perspective that deals with the tradition of the Orishas in Bahia. So just inside one country, you got 4 different kind of flavors of it just amongst themselves. I really like how it's growing now in the French-speaking Black world with some of the organizers we got in Cameroon. We're going to be doing an event in South Africa. The way they're doing it, I really like how theirs is growing. So so it's like as I told some of the younger organizers recently, my role is almost complete with that, and they're going to probably carry the torch forward here within the next few years, because I just wanted to get it started and prove that it was a Pan-African phenomenon, which we have done, and now we have the scholarship to support that. So now, because one of the things I remember John and I talked about back when we had the Astro Blackness functions going on, the importance of us defining everything. And so there's not going to be any kind of pan-European academy defining what we do. We define it. And then if they do, we're just going to say, well, that's a pan-European way of looking at it. But Black people are going to be defining our what we create and not other people. And there'll be other ancillary projects around film and other stuff that are coming out. I mean, it's an explosion that I had said was coming up out of COVID, because a lot of people have really been grinding. And the Black Angel Project, the Black Angel of History project that's up on Google Arts, that was with Carnegie Hall, is like, I that's like the culmination of a trilogy that started with the Schomburg Project and Unveiling Visions, then the Curating the End of the World. So the Black Angel of History project is kind of the end of a trilogy related to some ideas that happened in the last decade. And so now I think one of the people whose work I'm looking at, people like Natrice Gaskins and others, where we're moving into the Web 3.0 perspective, or what people call the semantic web, blockchain technology, non-fungible tokens, in terms of what that looks like here going forward over the next 36 months.
Okay.
Well, I've got a few things on the horizon right now. I've got conversations with Nalo Hopkinson, an essay, a collection of interviews that I've got the rights to, and also did a couple of interviews with her for the book that is coming out from the University Press of Mississippi sometime in late 2022, early 2023, just waiting on page proofs for that. I'm involved as one of 4 co-editors in the Rutledge Handbook of Co-Futurisms, where we are trying to give voice to younger scholars and established scholars looking at different iterations of BIPOC creators across the world in terms of what they are doing, trying to help continue to establish the colored wave of science fiction, at least as far as people in my academic circles think of it, which I find fascinating. And finally, I'm working on a book called Critical Race Theory and Science Fiction, and I'm primarily looking at counter narratives, color blindness, interest convergence, and dating back to Derek Bell's The Space Traders. I've found some earlier things, but just playing with the precedent of, what would white people do if aliens came down from space and offered clean energy, gold, and chemicals to clean up the environment for every black person in America. Well, you know what they did. They created an imaginary 27th Amendment that sends all black people into space to an unknown future if you haven't read the sequel, right? But I'm interested in that. The novum is the aliens coming down, right? This wrinkle that changes everything. But there's a second novum, which I'm calling the noirum, playing on French for black and Suvin's novum. And that noirum is the creation of some kind of legal precedent, whether it's an amendment or a law or an act created by one of the branches of the U.S. government. So this is U.S. specific. That alters the history of black people. And so I'm interested in the writing that has gone on in that vein. It doesn't have to be by black writers, but it has to impact black people. And so I've been grinding away on that, and I'm about 3/4 done and looking to shop it around as soon as I do revisions on a chapter featuring Matt Johnson's Pym, read against Edgar Allan Poe's The Narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym of Nantucket, and another fabulous writer. And so also working on zombies. I have looked at Devil's Wake and Dominoes Falls because I love me some Barnes and Dew. I really do. And so, having fun with it. And that's the next thing on my horizon. That's really all I want to do, but what can I say? I've got to teach. Got to feed my kids.
Yeah.
All right, we'll take it, Tim.
Multiple mediums working in let's see, book stuff. Maddie's Rocket book 1 was just reissued, infinitum. So presently working on Maddie's Rocket books 2 and 3 simultaneously. Hope to have that done later on this year. Let's see what else we got. Brother Robo middle grade book, working on that. Hope to get to that by next year. Presently, and you can see a few pages of it in the Black Angel History Show, going through the daunting task of doing breakdowns for Chip Delaney's Nova, which I've been trying to do since I was 18. Let's see what else we got going. Black Metropolis, the book form. So you have the exhibit, which will be traveling. You have the documentary, which I'll get to in a moment. And then, of course, the book version kind of entered into tentative discussions with a publisher, but I may end up doing it with my own company, but I'm trying to get that done by end of summer. Film. Studio Visceral, a company I own with my twin brother. We just finished up the Black Metropolis documentary, which premiered during the festival. We have the horror film called Flow, which premiered during the festival. We have a TV show, 8 episodes. We front loaded everything, meaning we did all of the work first, so we didn't have to go to a studio. So now I have to finish the pitch deck after this to where we take all the finished projects and start pumping them into the studio system. See, outside of that, I think keep living, change my diet, God help me, and don't get hit by any buses while I'm crossing the street. That's what I'm doing.
All right, Jelly.
Yeah, those are words to live by. You guys are like the hardest working Negroes in fiction. Oh my God, y'all are like what was it in Living Color? The Headleys. You have one job. Y'all have like
Yes, yes.
yeah. No, I do not
Trying
have
to
any.
keep up with you youngsters.
Yeah, got a lot. So I don't have anything that exciting. Actually I'm an academic as well. I'm in history, and my entire world right now is getting that book manuscript done for tenure. So my speculative fiction stuff has been like way over there. I have, but I have done some things. Very few. I did a recent essay that's coming out, and I can't remember the name of the book, but who's going to publish it. But it's a edited volume, and it's speaking on issues of politics and activism and the use of speculative fiction. And I did an essay on Pauline Hopkins' of One Blood, looking at it as aspects of futurism, as well as related it to Afrocentric ideology. Remember Afrocentrism? Remember that? So I got to bring up got to bring up some early folks in there. Got to bring up some what's her name? Now I'm blanking on all my people who wrote those. Drusilla Dunjee Houston. Got to bring up some of those old names that people have forgotten, or the Jamaican J.A. Rogers and some of that to talk about what she's doing. So got to introduce that because I grew up in that world. I became an academic historian, but my introduction to history was like X-Clan. Right? And so
to the east, to the east.
Come on, Vainglorious. Those
Vainglorious.
Yep. You'd have been annoyed talking to me back in the day. Like you had to graduate kind of out of it, and okay, thank you for introducing me to these other things and getting me to understand a bit more in history. But I always say that base where I came from, I reach back to it from time to time because it's there. Even if I critique it in my own way, it's still there. And so, I got to do that with that essay. I have some other stuff that I can't talk about because it's embargoed. I'm sorry. So I am going into middle grade. My next work's actually going to be middle grade in fantasy. So that's going to be interesting to go there. And yeah, that's really all. And I have contracts for books that I haven't bothered to think about yet. So it's all academic manuscript all the time. As soon as I get off here, I'm going into edit that chapter. And so the side of me that would do a lot of speculative fiction creation has kind of laying that a little dormant for a while, so I can, as somebody said, so I can keep the food on the table.
And I'm glad you all keep writing, man, because now I always tell people, like I was talking with Cherie Renee Thomas, and it's amazing all the people in the last since Panther that all of a sudden have changed their resumes and have become experts on this stuff. And that's why I tell people, I'm like, look, read Isaiah Lavender, read Barnes' stuff, because these people were doing this stuff while they were before this stuff really got big now. But I've seen people undergo this metamorphosis in the last 6 years, and all of a sudden they want to talk about Afrofuturism, and a lot of it's just trash in terms of they haven't done the work. I'm sorry. Isaiah Lavender's done the work. P. Jelly, I trust you. If Steven said something, I listen, but some people that I'm like, wait a minute, the first 10 years you were doing this, and then in 24 months you just flipped. And I know it took me several years of just reading before I felt comfortable writing about this stuff. To me, who goes undermentioned are when I've asked people if they read Sam Greenlee or John A. Williams, The Man Who Cried
Who sat by the door?
Yeah, Spook was. I mean, that for me in my family, that's the stuff I read along with comic books. Greenlee, The Man Who Cried I Am by John A. Williams, and others. That I think The Man Who Cried I Am would make a great movie. And I think Greenlee's work has been adopted. And so that's what I'm saying. This literary tradition goes way back, and I'm still learning and coming across short stories of people, whatever. And I mean, that's why I'm glad Isaiah is doing what he's doing, and I'm glad that Jelly's doing what he's doing, because in these academic realms, these white folks don't know who's trash and who's not. They'll people who put Afrofuturism on something, they won't even know how to read it right in terms of, it being vetted, because there are not enough people. I suggested to somebody, I said, look, if you can't find an academic, there are people that have been writing in this field who don't have a PhD that know more about it than the PhDs do, and they should be brought into the process on their opinions on some of this stuff.
You know, my wife, Tanana Reeve Du, both writes Afrofuturism and teaches a class in it at UCLA.
Yeah.
And if you don't mind, you know, we transform that class so that it's available streaming online at www.afrofuturismwebinar.com.
Yeah.
You can find out more about that. And, you know, it's our best stuff. I mean, we really are trying to give a good representation of what the field is, where it came from, where it's going. So I would feel comfortable recommending that course to people interested in a deeper dive.
Definitely. I think it's really important. I think what came across throughout this discussion that people, and this is the historian part of me, people understand there's a history to this, right? Because I think what Ronaldo, what you're saying, and Stephen, what you're saying, understanding that there's this history and background. And if, you know, for instance, looking at horror noir, looking at the history of horror. And so I think it's really needed because you have a lot of folks who are, I think, just coming into it, and they're sometimes allowed to write critiques and criticisms. And then you can just tell, like, well, you don't know anything about the genre. You don't know anything about genre, right? If you're like, why does Black horror focus on issues of Black trauma? Do you know what Black horror is? Like, go ask Dr. Kenitra Brooks, and she'll be able to field you on the history and how Black people have been using, you know, the things that scare us. Like, what scares us is you say a time machine. I want to go back to 1750 something. That's scary to me. Like, what do I need to do if I'm going there, right? That we have these different ideas of fear. And I think sometimes I've noticed that some of the critiques that come out don't acknowledge that. They don't understand the history of it. They don't understand the cultural background of it. And so sometimes I've seen critiques of things and I was like, okay, I understand everybody has a critique, but the critique you're making is not based at all in the history of the genre and the Black experience and the folks that have been doing it.
You just gave me a story idea. I'm going to give it away because I'm not going to get to it. But, you know, the Green Book for Black travelers in the South? Imagine a Green Book for Black time travelers.
Oh, I got one already.
Please, write that story so I can read it.
I am actually, if anybody wants to come in on me on this, I actually wrote a short story. I've been trying to do it, and I'm glad you said it, Stephen, and I'll put it out here. The Green Book Black Interdimensional Traveler's Guide.
There you go.
I have a short story in it.
Awesome.
My dream is to, like, someday turn it into an actual book, like the Green Book, with mock things about people who travel to other dimensions, Dimension X that you have to worry about, and so forth. So I'm glad you put it out there, Stephen. I'm glad I got all these great minds here. Anybody interested in doing that, the time travelers and the extra dimensional Negro Traveler's Guide, let me know. Love to put together a mock book on it. Love to get some minds in on it because I can't do it myself.
Hey, I'd like to be a part of that. I mean, I used to be able to say I was able to keep up with all of the science fiction written by Black people, but the explosion that has occurred now is just amazing. I can't keep up with it all. I can stockpile it, and I've been doing that, and with every intention of reading more and more. But you know, there's just so many people to think about now. Like River Solomon is an amazing writer. Cherie Thomas, in her own right, is an amazing writer. Tatiana Bucci is another amazing writer. I just love Riot Baby to no end. Violet Allen is a name that not many have heard yet, but she did an amazing story called The Venus Effect in Lightspeed. That's just captivating, that deals with a Black male youth that dies 9 times, shot and killed by a police in various scenarios as she's thinking her way through it, on what we could do as a way of you know, struggling with the trauma of Black existence right now in this police state that we find ourselves in. Just an amazing story. So I'm, you know, like I was saying, this is an amazing time period in which to live. One of the other things I'm trying to do is uplift other scholars, younger scholars interested in this area, Black and white and Asian and every color, I suppose, because there's room for multiple perspectives to look at this. And there's just some amazing work out there right now. Joy Sanchez Taylor's Diverse Futures is an amazing book that looks at race in science fiction from a multiracial perspective that I've always found a fantastic work. It just came out in 2021, and so just looking at things like that, getting excited by what's going on in the scholarly world as well as the creative world. What can I say? It's a good time to be me in that respect.
Yeah. Awesome. I want to ask, what impact would you like your art to make on the world? My perspective, I think my talent has been putting together spaces for Black people to create and to congregate within the sci-fi genre. So what impact do you want to leave on the world? What do you want to be known for?
Yeah, I'll start out with that. It's interesting. So I've been doing this for a long time. And like as Stephen said, there was Chip and Octavia. Then Chip kind of went his own way, and then there was Stephen and Octavia for a long while, and then you were alone for a while. But there were other practitioners who were working, right? It's particularly in the visual space. So I'm a visual Afrofuturist who told stories. You got people like Mashindo Kumbai, Gray Williamson. These guys went for decades, have gone for decades, producing that work, but never could get their work out on a more mainstream level. They certainly did it through groups like ANIA and things like that. But I think what's happening now is that the technology has expanded the reach and the consumer habits in such a dynamic way that you're now beginning to expand beyond the field of just prose. And this is why film is coming in much more dynamically now. I want, for me, I have to, because of now that things have opened up for myself personally and professionally, so I have to now work in the present, producing work for the future, but also making sure all of the work that was unpublished over the decades are now coming into being. And that's a daunting task, but it's something that I feel like what I want. It is overwhelmingly important to me that my legacy be preserved, and to do so in such a way where, because one of the things I learned is the last scene in Black Metropolis is like everybody has a dirt bath coming, no exceptions. And what that means is that it is the responsibility, and it took me till I was 40 to get it. It is my responsibility to advocate for my own bibliography, because no one else will do it. And sometimes you have to crack those eggs to make that omelet. That's what it requires. It requires being aggressive for those who are young, but also for those who are not so young, to be focused and to understand that whatever it is you want to do, you must advocate for that.
Awesome.
I'd say with my own, I'm pretty secure in terms of where I've gotten to this point. My goal, like I always tell people, I'm a theorist in terms of how I develop my ideas. And the purpose of the Black Speculative Arts movement, like I don't use the term BIPOC and the other stuff that has become popular recently, because what I've looked at, and I guess from my knowledge of history, is nobody respects you, or they're not interested until you prove that you don't need them. And when we built the Black Speculative Arts movement, self-financing everything, I know some people were scared. I had a Hollywood director ask me, well, why do you gotta call it Black? And I'm saying, why not? And that's why I like what the young people said. Everybody wants to be Black until it's time to do some Black shit. And so, and I was offered $500,000 at the Cannes Film Festival in 2018 to sell the intellectual ideas to BSAM, and I turned it down. And so my attitude is, I'm going to get my respect. We're going to control what we control. And then I'm willing to partner with people, because as one of my colleagues points out, when Black people create something, we're automatically expected to invite people to come sit at our table. But when we try to go to their table, they'll slap our hand away. And so my attitude, the way I do things, like, I can do this without you. I invite you to participate because everybody is welcome. But, you know, I'm not going to surrender my agency to make you feel better about yourself, you know, in terms of you're invited to participate. But what happens a lot of times, then people want to call shots. And that just comes from my organizational background, where if I organize 100 Black people to protest, and then somebody from a different background shows up with 15 people and then act like they have the same kind of vote at the table. No, you just got 15 votes, bro. You know, so that is why the young Black people, and I've said this before, most of the people in Afrofuturism my age are millennials and Gen Z, because everybody my age or whatever their makeup is pretty much dried up in the paint at the moment. The young people want to do something different. And I'm going to say, you don't have to ask for permission to be great and to be who you are. You know, just, you know, be you, build it for us and other people. If it's dope enough, people will come of different backgrounds that are going to come with the right spirit to democratically participate with you, but never give away your agency just to be accepted.
I think that there are two core questions in art, just as there are in philosophy. Who am I and what is true? I've always, I mean, the core thing I wanted to do was to tell stories. I wanted to tell good adventure stories. And then I wanted to tell adventure stories that reflected people who looked like me, realizing that I was going to run into resistance for that. And for a while, I did not accept that challenge. But then one day, a friend of mine, Darnell Gadberry, a Black computer engineer, I was expressing to him my feeling that if I did not have stories that reflected Black people, I was betraying the child that I had been. But if I did, I could damage my career and have a hard time supporting myself. And he said one of the most important things in the world that I've ever heard. He said, Steve, eventually people are going to have to start writing these stories that show us in the world. If not you, who? If not now, when? And why would you want to write stories for the pleasure of people you wouldn't want to have in your home? That woke me up. All I ever wanted to do was to be a storyteller and express myself and to show the world as it is. But that, in a world in which the country, which I love, claims that it is something that it is not, and has always claimed that we are something that we are not, just demanding to be yourself and to speak your truth is a revolutionary act.
Yeah.
That's as far as I'll go in terms of politics. I will be who I am. I will speak of the world that I see. And I don't really give a shit what people think about it. And I am glad that so many people feel that they have gotten something positive from what it is that I've done. I've honestly done the best I could over the course of my career. And it gives me great pleasure that people are standing on my shoulders, seeing further and going further, and may they continue to do so. I feel no jealousy for the opportunities that you have at all, because first of all, if you're not careful, I'm going to kick your ass. I'm still in the game.
That's right. That's right. I mean, you're correct. Yeah, you're correct. It's this generation that's out now is the first generation. But I'm 55. I've said this before. My career would be over in the old world.
Yeah.
But in the new world, I am myself and people in my area are more in demand because we have experience. So we're going to take your lunch money. We're going to take all your money.
See, let me tell you the difference between my generation and the younger generation right now. My generation was focused on seeing, can we be treated fairly?
That's right.
Yeah.
And although I have enormous respect, please do not think I am in any way disrespecting Martin Luther King or Gandhi or Jesus or those who said, let's come from the place of love and let's all see each other's humanity. That was the tactic that was going to work at that period. But it does remind me just a little bit of the little, orphan boy Oliver and Oliver Twist saying, please, sir, may I have my rights? The current generation Their attitude is much more of, excuse me, why don't you tell me why my children don't deserve exactly the same rights your children have? And if you'd like to, we can continue this discussion outside. That is different. To be able to do that and get away with it, that is different. I have nothing but love and respect for that. That is a warrior attitude, and the warrior attitude is exactly what they tried to strip away from us. That's why they stripped away our names and culture and religion and language and music and history and mythology and on and on and on. You brainwash all that, then you implant slave 1.0 software. And then upon emancipation, you put, free man 1776, software on there, and then you wonder why it's buggy and crashes sometimes. So what y'all are doing is you're getting back to the machine language of human beings, which is basically I am, and I have the right to be here. And on top of that, you can build a future. And so I am so proud and so humbly grateful if anything I've done ever contributed to that by a micrometer of change. I'd like to feel that I pulled my part. Carried my end of the log. More than that, I cannot say. And it's a great time to be alive.
All right. Jillian, did you get in on that one?
No, but we're about to hit the 2-minute mark, so I want to give everybody a chance I concur with everything everyone said. I just want to give everyone a chance really to say those last words. I know we're about to ease on out.
Oh, we can go into overtime. We give Jarvis a chance to open up the doors of the church.
Do we have questions?
Oh, it's definitely Sunday now. When I was younger, those were like the worst words I wanted to hear because I was trying to get out of there.
We got a few minutes left, but I'm just saying, each one of us that's in this, that I see on this box on the screen, we had to go through our own private hell sometimes. That's why Stephen doesn't know how much I always reflect on his words that he said several years ago. I probably think about him at least once every couple of weeks when I'm in the middle of something or I'm tried by a political something about, where people say, hey, I'm afraid of doing this. And then, because I'm that guy, I've been that professor who's been brought in to say something because the person who worked there was afraid to say something because of their job. And I just always have had a fearless attitude, like, look, I'm going to speak my and whatever, and let the chips fall where they may. Sometimes it's cost me. I know it has cost me in the past, but I can sleep well at night because I have too many of my peers who are in therapy because of those kind of. I'm telling them what it is. You and I, we all know we got friends that, got to go see somebody because of what it's done to their psychological well-being, even in my own generation. And my thing is, I'd rather be known as Bam. Just for doing Afrofuturism, I had a French person of a museum tell my organizer in Cameroon that I was a black supremacist just for doing Afrofuturism. And then I told him to tell her the only thing the French have ever been good at doing is retreating from the Germans and maybe cooking pastries, and they haven't been and so they're still sad about Napoleon. That's why they act like such jerks about their art and language. And so, I probably get one of these every couple of weeks dealing with this international network. And so, that's why, Steve was preaching to me today. And that's why I'm unapologetic about pushing forward our vision. And then it's indirectly giving, see what we've been doing. We are underappreciating the value and agency we've given other people, because one of my former students now has really aggressively embraced indigenous futurism because what we're doing. And so, and she is a member, and she always proudly says, oh yeah, my tribe is the tribe that killed Custer. And I'm like, yes, in terms of, where she's really reading all this Native American, indigenous American futurism stuff, because it's given her an idea for her tribe over in the Midwest to think of a future, because of what that was taken from them in this on this continent. Is taking her in different directions now, that what she wants to do with her own work. And so us doing what we do seems to give people permission to do their thing also.
Okay.
Right.
So, given that, we're looking toward the future and the younger people. Um, for someone to, well, younger or older for that matter, looking for direction in terms of getting involved in Afrofuturism, where would you have someone start in terms of supporting Afrofuturism and becoming a creator of Afrofuturism?
I would say read my books.
Well, I'm going to say this. I will say this very briefly. One of the things is because it's like with my show that's up now, it's only up for another week. It has dawned on me just from the reaction of folks who have attended the show and the coverage of it, that it's one of the few collections of visual Afrofuturism as it intersects with comics over 30 years old that's been assembled. And so what it's done is I've asked people, "Oh, are you selling pieces?" And I feel reluctant to do that because I feel like I would then be giving away part of history. If that makes sense, what I'm saying, I feel like I have an obligation to archive it as opposed to try to engage in some kind of commerce-based activity with it. Because prior to that, I never saw that. Not when it comes to comics and Afrofuturism. I just didn't see it. So why would I then sell it or give it away or make sure it's locked away in some kind of key? That's been important. So that to answer the question, make sure you archive your work. Make sure you archive your work. Make sure that you build relationships with scholars and academics that will take you seriously. Which to the credit of BSAM, Ronaldo, Kenitra, Tanisha, all those folks allowed me to workshop my work within those environments that was never given before. And so make sure you build your networks with the scholars, the academics, and make sure you archive and finish your work. It's very important.
Right. From my perspective, and what I tell students is you begin with the roots, and I mean the science fiction roots. I'm not going to talk about African American literature previous to the emergence of Chip Delaney, right? So I'd read Chip Delaney, I'd read Butler, I'd read Barnes, I'd read Charles Saunders. I'd start with those four, maybe John M. Fawcett if you can find some of his work. Move forward, right? Then you would come into what I call the four ends of Nalo Hopkinson, Nnedi Okorafor, Nisi Shaw, and N.K. Jemisin. And then you go beyond them and look at the new writers that are coming out, or at least new to me writers. And so that would be Clark, P.J. Clark right there, and that would be Tachi Onyebuchi, and that would be Rivers Solomon, and that would be people like that. And there's a vast sea out there. But for me, I would also read outside of African American literature and just take an interest in literature writ large. So I would look at indigenous authors. I'd start with Gerald Vissner because of Bearheart, which is that's a tough book to teach, but it's amazing to read. So I'd go there. I'd look at Louise Erdrich and Leslie Marmon Silko, and then I'd go to Stephen Graham Jones and move forward. And then you'd switch registers and go to what's going on in Chinese science fiction and what's going on in Indian science fiction, what's going on the African continent, and just like buy edited collections of creative work. And I've bought like 28 different anthologies just in the past 10 years. And there's undoubtedly going to be some gems in there. And that's what, I'm getting too expansive for other things that I'm looking at. But that's what I would do. I would look at the primary source material, at least for me as a literature person, look at the writing that has come out, and then expand and look at other places, and always give credit to the people that have come before, right? And so we have to give credit to Mark Derry for coming up with the term, but we also have to give props to Delaney, Tate, and Rose for actually doing the theorizing in that set of interviews that brings about what I think of as Afrofuturism. And so, I'll be eternally grateful. I didn't know you could do this thing. I'm just a black boy from Buffalo that fell in love with fantasy and science fiction writing at key moments in my life when I had my epiphanal moments of blackness, to use a phrase from a friend of mine, Piper Kendricks Williams. And so that's just how I approach it. I am happy to be a part of the conversation, in truth.
Can I ask Desi? Can I ask Jelly? Your book, The Djinn, man. What did you do on the background search for that? Because I was talking to a friend of mine. I said, man, Jelly, putting that book together. I know you've been looking at some different sources to come up with some ideas for that. Mm-hmm. And I was thinking of that's the book that that's on my radar right now, and I haven't had a chance to finish it yet. But you've intrigued me with that title and what the story's about, and how did that come together for you, that Djinn project?
Yeah. No, thank you. It started with a short story called The Dead Djinn in Cairo. And it started out when I was adjuncting. I was working on my PhD. I was adjuncting. You know the adjunct life. You take what you get. And so I was teaching a lot of world civ classes, like 1500 to modern day. And so I was doing a lot of anti-colonialism, and from also grad school, had read enough of my Said and what have you. But I was also showing Pontecorvo's Battle of Algiers in class, right? Okay. I was showing that in class. And if you can get where I'm going, somewhere in between that, and thinking of anti-colonialism and thinking of everything from CLR James, thinking of it 1930s and so forth, I started thinking about creating an anti-colonial type of speculative fiction. Right? I started doing the thing. I think that going back to our early conversations, we're always like, what if? How would the world be different? How do we change it? And I was actually reading on the power of the Maxim gun, right? And how they called it the conqueror of Africa, because it would show up, and they said literally the guy who creates it gives it to a group of Europeans going off on a quote unquote mission down to Sudan and elsewhere. And he says, I want this gun to have a psychological effect on the natives, right? The fact that it can kill so many. And you hear these various African peoples talking about their encounter with it, saying that, we just heard bap, bap, bap. And then I looked around and everyone around me was dead. Right. And how it did have that was its purpose, right? To terrorize, literally, which I've always find irony, because by World War I, Europeans would terrorize themselves with the machine gun. Right. But early on, it's meant to terrorize. And so when I was thinking about that, I was thinking, I think back to thinking of J.R. Tolkien's with Theoden, and he's talking about having to face off against the orcs. And he says, what can one man do in the face of such reckless hate? Right. And I started thinking, like, how would you counter this? I came up with magic. I was like, what if the various folklores and beliefs and magic, what if magic became the counter to colonial technology, to the Industrial Revolution and these kinds of things? And story kind of grew from there. And so in the story, it's that the arrival, there's a Sudanese mystic, you have the arrival of the Djinn. Things go differently for the British as they try to conquer Egypt, and the world has changed, right? And now the colonial powers are on the run everywhere, as magic is now allowing various people that we would think of as conquered people fight back. But so a lot of it came out of that desire always to, like, as a marginalized person, like, how do I counter the past? How do I overthrow white supremacy, right? In ways that I can't do it physically now. So how would I do it? How could I imagine a different world? Even trying to imagine that nebulous thing called the post-colonial, what a society might look like after they've gotten rid of colonialism and they have to deal with their own issues, right? Free of dealing with whatever colonialism has wrought. And so it came out of that. And it also came, when I was talking about before, my old Afrocentric past, right? This time, while it's set in Egypt, I always say Afrocentrics often act like Egypt like kind of ended sometime in the ancient period and that it didn't exist any further. And so a lot of my work takes place in the 1912 Egypt, and it pulls a lot on medieval Egypt, which is often goes undiscussed, but it also reaches back to that Afrocentric interest in ancient Egypt, right? And so I get to pull on all of that and kind of put it all into the mix, into the story. And so it was a fun story to write. We talk about the time periods we live in. People have said that, I think Tim said this, that writing a time period where the work that we're doing can actually be put out there. And so when I first did A Dead Gin in Cairo, I had done a story like that just several years before. There would have been nowhere to publish it, to be quite honest. I don't think a lot of people have picked it up. I think the various people sitting at slush piles and what have you to pick up these things would not have. And it just so happened someone was sitting at the slush pile at Tour. I should say someone was minding the gates who happened to be a Vietnamese American editor. Right?
Diana Pho?
Diana Pho was interested in speculative fiction and steampunk. And I'd actually put a call out on Facebook because I was like, I finished the story and I have nowhere to send it. I was that desperate. And I just thought it would just retire to my hard drive. And she just out the blue said, hey, let me see that. And here I am. Right? Yada, yada, yada. That's how people it's always tell this story to tell people like, put your work out there. You never know who's going to be listening and when it might find interest. And again, I tell what Tim has said. I said, we live in this moment now where people are actually looking for this and they're looking for it to read it. They're looking of interest to it. And that means it's interesting to the people who are publishing it because they're trying to sell. Right. And I said, and so we live in this moment now where if you have these ideas, and before it was happy that I had a place like State of Black Science Fiction to share them among other Black people and spaces like that. Now you have a chance to put it out there into the world. So please put it out there into the world because you never know who wants to see it.
Can I make a comment for people who want to do the kind of thing that I have done? The classic science fiction writers like Jules Verne and H.G. Wells were people who knew literature and technology. The first generation of science fiction writers in the golden age were pretty much the same thing. Then there was a generation after that who did not know literature and technology. They knew science fiction. So they were not writing at the same level, but they're starting to synthesize something. What I want for the next generation of Afrofuturists is to decide, if you want to do the kind of thing that I have done, decide on the branch of science that they're interested in. What do they want to become experts in? Sufficiently expert to be able to meet one of the top people in that field at a cocktail party and engage them in conversation, asking them intelligent questions. Know literature, classic literature, not just Black literature, but literature from all over the world. What's the stuff that has lasted? And then understand some aspects of the science you can connect all the way back to physics. Now, there are other ways of doing it, but I think that would be my suggestion for people who want to do the kind of thing that I have done. And it is available to so many people, and I see so many people who are doing wonderful jobs that I want to make sure that to make a specific comment about what I think the path is to one way of being excellent in this field and surviving in it long enough, writing mediocre stuff that sells long enough to maybe find the excellent part of you and hopefully find the classic game-changing part of you. It takes a lot of sperm to sterilize one egg. An awful lot of people have to fail in order to reveal the genius that is one in thousands. So we have to support the field long enough for those geniuses to get through their embryonic period and to finally say, this is my voice, and have a chance to be found. We can do this. I do think that it is important for us to do the work that will allow us to become masters of our craft.
And that is one of the things, Steve, and what Isaiah to put that together. Once they find out what they like I've told my students, as I grew up a military family, born on a military base. So yeah, I'm that kid that played with toy soldiers, and I'm reading like the Odyssey and the Iliad, and then I'd read Thucydides, who was a philosopher. I'd read geopolitical concepts, and so that's why I look at military science. I'm and then Tim, and as Tim has been pushing me in there. So yeah, I like military science. So I'm not going to really be interested in studying all the little peaceful, flowery, let's all pass out bouquets and stuff kind of stuff, because it's a violent world we live in. So I look at, okay, if I have to do a story or a theory that is to defend my community or to attack or something like this, yeah, I'm going to go back and I'm going to review some Thucydides, some Frantz Fanon, as you talk about with the anti-colonial, who dealt with the psychology of oppressed people. So that's why when Isaiah said, read outside of the genre you want to write about. Because if you like military science or you're a tech person, my Afrofuturism, to me, the most important theorist for me was Anna Everett. That was in the book that Alondra Nelson put together. So I was not influenced so much by Mark Derry's coin of Anna Everett, because my background was in communication studies, and we were theorizing about the internet and what would become Facebook and all this other kind of stuff 2.0 back in the 90s. So if you're in, so that's why I tell people, read what you want to specialize in. And then as Sean said, talk to those people who do this stuff in science or religion. Some of the people now that are religion getting into Afrofuturism and P. Jelly Clark. So yeah, all this thread works together. Read outside of what it is you want to engage in.
Let me say this. I just want to say it's very important, because I mentioned a few folks who were my contemporaries, but I wanted, just taking to what Steve and Ronaldo are saying, from a visual storytelling point of view, I wanted to really just take a moment to acknowledge the work of Overton Lloyd and Pedro Bell, who are the original P-Funk artists that did comics within that sound, had a tremendous influence on me as well. And he doesn't get mentioned enough is Turtel Only. This guy has been cranking for decades. I consider him one of the forerunners. And it's just important that you know who came before you, who were kind of, when it wasn't fun, like there was zero fun, was doing it to kind of like set that table for the visual storytellers out there.
Okay.
All right.
All right, fellas. Well, I want to thank you all very much for taking your time out today out of your busy schedules for this panel. It has been truly enlightening. That's all I can say. It's been very enlightening, because you guys are super talented and have a wealth of knowledge. And thank you for sharing that today. Now, what I would like to do at this point is I want you all to share where people can find you, where people can support what you're doing in terms of dollars. I'm not talking about support like, hey, I like what you're doing. I'm talking about, where can we buy your stuff?
LifeWritingPodcast.com is a podcast my wife and I are doing, and you can connect with us, and we talk about all the stuff we're doing, as well as how to get into the field. We actually talk about our projects and all the techniques we're using to get ourselves there, and the people we're meeting, and strategies and tactics, and we have professionals coming on talking about how to get in. We're trying to leave a trail of breadcrumbs for other people. If you want to, send some money our way, the Life Writing Premium class is our year-long writing program, and LifeWritingWebinar.com is, or rather Afrofuturismwebinar.com is our doorway in. It's our best. That's our best stuff on what this field is, and what the tools that understandings that we have, and the tools that we're using to survive.
Awesome.
I would say to support what I'm doing, I won't say buy any of my books, because the press makes more of the money than I do. I would say the Black Speculative Arts Movement, we have a Patreon account, and I only say that because a lot of times we're also helping organizers in countries that don't have access to the same type of resources we have. Like, for example, one of our main organizers in Nigeria last year, we would send stuff through cryptocurrency in terms of getting some things done. Or we set up workshops trying to network people into this in some of the other countries that aren't as fortunate as we are, or just individuals out there that are trying to tie into this. So Patreon, if it's just $2 a month, anything helps, because it helps us with getting certain type of ads done, or just some printing, or sending somebody some money to print off some art to put up on a wall in Yaoundé or someplace in some other small town. I mean, we're trying to do something in Colombia in August, so I'm trying to get up on my Spanish real quick. And so yeah, our Patreon account, because then it goes directly to the people who are doing the work. Thank you. And our website is bsam-art.com.
Well, I'm just Isaiah.lavender@uga.edu. And as Ronaldo said, you know, my books are with academic presses, university presses. I make enough money to take my family to Chick-fil-A off of my books. Great. You know, that's it. But the word's out there, and I can say I've achieved immortality because they are in libraries. And
yes,
that's enough for me.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm at, you can find my stuff at pjellyclark.com. You can find the things I've written and what have you. And yeah, the same thing. You buy them wherever people sell books. You know, if you can support a small or indie bookstore, all the better. You know, they'll order it for you if you'd like, but you know, you can get it anywhere you can. And of course, the libraries. Look, my mother took me to the library, my sister and I, every week. We were living in New York in Staten Island, Shaolin. And we would go to the library there like almost every week, and I could check out as many books as I can. And that had basically a definite impact on my writing. So I know if you can buy my book, great. But if you can also go to the library and check it out, also great.
Yeah, very crucial time for me. Go to dieselfunk.com. There you will find Infinitum and Maddie's Rocket. Maddie's Rocket is published by my company, Diesel Funk Studios, where all fine books are sold. You can even buy it from Walmart if you want. I need as many copies of Maddie's Rocket to sell so I can finish Nova, which is killing me. I can finish Maddie's Rocket 2 and 3 and all the rest of the books. I have no shame for all the academics out there. I do visits. I do virtual visits. And as Professor Anderson will tell you, I always put on a show. So don't be afraid to ask. Say, hey, Tim, will you come by and visit my class? Yes, I will.
All right. And as for myself, you can find me at blacksciencefictionsociety.com. You can look it up on Facebook, Black Science Fiction Society on Instagram and Twitter. And like I said, I prefer to be a conduit for others, where you can buy the anthology, which features 24 independent writers, support their work. You can support our magazine, which is an exhibition for other people's work. And I just want to thank you all sincerely for coming today and being a part of this and sharing your expertise. It is much needed what you're doing, so continue to do what you're doing. And I also want to throw in really quickly, thank you to Mr. Terrence Coles for running the background technology for this panel today. You're much appreciated.
Yeah.
Thank you all for coming today.
All right.
Can we do a screen capture, man? I need this for social, man. I need it for social.
Sure.
Got it.
All right.
All right. Thank you all for real.
Hey,
It's
thanks.
been really great. Somebody mentioned doing a part 2. I'm down. Let me know.
All righty.
Hey, take
Bye-bye.